Hello again, and welcome back. Today's discussion is going to be about the system user flow. And again, I am joined together with my colleague Margareta. Hello, Margareta. How are you doing today?
Hi, Tony. I'm fine. Really looking forward to this one too.
Excellent. So today we're talking about the system user flow, how to create a server-to-server application, and hopefully being able to authenticate the application with a user and see how things go. Is that right?
Or we should authenticate as a system user, so not a normal user.
Right, that's right. So we'll authorize the application using a normal user, an administrative user, and then go ahead and get back a system user token and all that other jazz necessary to authenticate using an application.
Yes.
Okay, so I got a few slides here to go through just to talk about system user a little bit, sort of look at the overview of what the flow is, and then we'll go ahead and dive into the developer portal and see how to create the application and actually use that flow using some applications. So talking about the different types of applications and when a system user flow is necessary, that's really focused on what your system requirements are or your application requirements. And the system user flow is really used when you don't have the possibility to have a user interactive login, so you need this server-to-server communication capability. Using the system user also, you need to know that you bypass all security checks. So there is no like by user, user to user type filtering of the data. You pretty much have unlimited access to all of the projects, all of the sales, all of the contacts inside a application using the system user. There is no UI associated with using the system user, so there's no login. You need to have a system user token in order to exchange it for a system user ticket credential, and we'll get more into that in a minute. And this can run as a background service. Microservice can be a serverless application. Completely up to you wherever there is no user interaction going on. So the system user is a very special user. It's created and authenticated by exchanging this magic string that you're given when you authenticate your application, or an administrative user authenticates the application for the first time, and you'll get back. Then you could use it to get back a system user ticket. So there's three things here that we want to sort of talk about that are related, and where the system user and system user token sort of reside. There's the authorization record that exists once a tenant administrative user allows an application with system user functionality enabled. It's where that system user token resides, and that's inside the SuperOffice Operations Center. And there's like a contract between that administrative user and that application creates an authorization record, which then has that system user token associated with it. Then there's the application. Once you get access to that system user token, the application has to store that system user token somewhere so that it can be used to exchange it for a system user ticket credential in the future. Then there's the tenant database. When the application, the server-to-server communication, uses that system user token to exchange it for a ticket credential, it's going to use that ticket credential to authenticate via the tenant web services, and of course that ticket credential has to be stored inside the tenant database for authentication and validation. The system user ticket credential is good for about 6 hours, but we recommend that you exchange it, the token, for the ticket, a new ticket, roughly every 4 or 5 hours is fine. But definitely don't do it like for every single service method call that you're going to make. So try and limit your exchanging the token for a ticket on a periodic basis. Like before and after long running batch processing, for example, is probably a good user case.
So in general, the system user token lives forever. for as long as the app authorization is there, while the system user ticket you get when you exchange the system user token for a ticket lasts for up to 6 hours.
Right, that's a great clarification. So how do applications actually use the system user? First, when you're in the developer portal, you have to make sure that you create an application that has the server-to-server communications or has the system user feature enabled. The applications have to have access to a system user token, right? You have to physically have that system user token, that magic string, so that you can exchange it for a system user credential. Once you do exchange that system user token for a JWT from SuperOffice, which contains the ticket credential, you have to make sure that you validate that JWT, and then, and only then after, extract that ticket claim to be used as a ticket credential. When you use it as a ticket credential using REST-based web services, for example, you'll want to decorate the request headers with an authorize property that, of course, has, instead of using a bearer token, you're going to use a SO ticket token, and then the ticket credential that you get back from SuperOffice in the JWT claim will be what you put in the ticket credential placeholder we have here. And then, of course, when you use the system user ticket for accessing a tenant's web services, you have to make sure to use the SO-at token header as well, which contains the application secret, otherwise known as a client secret. Let's take a look at this actually in a more step-by-step manner. So you've got the tenant administrator, who's first is going to, via a web panel or directly in a browser, access the partner application. The partner application is going to receive that request and then forward that user over to the SuperOffice Super ID login page. The user, the tenant administrator, will then go ahead and log in, and when successfully authenticated, he'll be prompted with the consent dialog where the user has to approve access to the tenant's web services for this application. Once he clicks approve, Super ID redirects the user back to the partner application along with the JWT. That JWT must be validated by the partner application. Once it's validated, the partner application can go ahead and extract the system user claim from that JWT and store that in his database. So we'll go ahead and store that magic string, that system user token. Then from that point on, the partner application can go ahead and be used by the background service, the server-to-server service that the partner application needs to use to get a system user ticket credential to be used for that tenant's web services. Another way to look at this is, let's say that the most complicated part of that scenario has already been performed. The tenant's administrative user has already consented to allowing this application to access his web services. So at this point, the background service is just going to continue running in the background every 5 hours or so. It's going to need to perform some operations against the tenant web services. So at that point, it goes ahead, grabs the system user token from the database, sends that off to the SuperOffice Partner System User endpoint. We'll go ahead and sign it, send it off. SuperOffice will validate it. When it's validated, it will return a JWT, which then the background service will validate. Once it's validated, then the background service can extract that ticket claim and then, of course, use that claim towards the tenant web services again. And then this just continues then for as long as the background service is running, and that system user token is good for the lifetime of the application, but the ticket that is being used between the background service and the tenant's web services, again, is only good for a maximum of 6 hours. So you need to redo this flow over and over again about every 5 hours or so, depending on how often your application requires to call the tenant's web services. Now, should we go ahead and try and put this into practical terms? Let's create an application in the dev portal. and get all of the required ingredients to exchange a system user token for a system user ticket credential and call some web services. Sound like a plan?
Sounds like a great plan.
All right. Okay, so here I am signed in to the dev portal under Stark Industries as Takashi. That it? That's who I am up here? Okay, there we go. What do I want to do? I want to create an application, right? We've already got Jarvis. So I want to create an application. And this time we are going to create a server-to-server application. So server-to-server application, of course, this could be for a background service, could be for a console application, a Windows service, a Damian service. It could be, it could also be a web application. It could be a native application. The wizard really is just used to sort of preset some settings in the application's configuration after the fact. I'm going to go ahead and create this as a custom application, but it could be a standard application. It really doesn't matter at this point, either or. So I'm going to go ahead and give it an application name. This time we're just going to call it Robot Service and click Next. For the redirect URL, we're going to go ahead and use our application, our custom application or our helper application up on DevNet-Tools. Yep, https devnet-tools.superoffice.com/openid/callback. So I'll go ahead and confirm that this is my technical contact, Takashish. Create the application. Then I come into the application configuration. I'm going to go ahead and bump up the font on this just a little bit because I see it's a little bit small. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and make some initial changes. I want the same client ID and secrets in all environments, so I'm just going to go ahead and choose to configure this on a common value. So I'll say this will be my client ID, and then I'm going to go ahead and create a client secret because I'm going to need that in order to sign my system user token. So I'll say used for a demo. I'll say 5 years, could be 24 months or less, 5 years or less. Add. Here's my client secret. I'm going to go ahead and copy that because it won't be visible after this point. And I'm going to go ahead and just start to save these values. Client secret, sometimes referred to as an app token. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy in my application ID as well. App name, I think I gave this robot service. And I don't have a system user token yet, and I haven't used it to authenticate with a context identifier yet or a customer ID. So I'm going to go ahead and hold off on that. Now I need a private key. I need a RSA XML certificate key in order to sign the system user token. So I'm going to come down to the certificate section. I'm going to, for a demo app.
And you observe that you're now in the what we call the simple mode of the application, and since you chose that you are going to make a server-to-server app, also the certificate is part of this initial simple mode of it.
Right. So if I chose a different application, I may not actually see the certificate section even if I'm in the simple mode of the configuration. Okay, great point. So I'll go ahead and choose that. This is going to be for a demo. Say add. Now I've got the private key and the public key. SuperOffice keeps the public key, and they use this so that they can validate our signed token. So I'll copy the private key only. I'll put it here, and I'll go ahead and save that for Stark Industries. Once I close this dialog, now I can, should I just save the settings, Margareta?
Yeah, you have what you need now, actually.
Yep. So I save it, and then you can see my certificates. Now it's only the public key that's visible. SuperOffice does not store the private side of this key. So I've got my client ID, I've got my client secret, which I can't see anymore. And at this point, I should be ready and have everything I need to get a system user ticket from this system user token. Or actually, I should be able to get a system user token at this point, I think is what I meant to say.
Yeah.
So I need to be able to sign in with these credentials.
And if you want to show how we actually mark this as a system user application, if you click Advanced, and you go to the Advanced settings,
and we
you
come
have
down
access to claims. So access to claims there is set by the wizard, and so you get back the system user token.
Awesome.
Now we could flip this for existing applications if you created it and then you see that, oops, I should have had the system token, but you would need our help to flip it.
So in that case, I would send a message here through the dev portal chat and request to have system user token. If I created a web application and I needed system user functionality, then I'd have to access this only by communicating with you, because I can see if I hover over this right now, I can't actually do anything. It's looks like it's disabled.
And it's actually, if you have an existing app published to production and it's in use by a lot of your customers, flipping this will require every one of them to say, I approve this app access still. So until they have actually reapproved it, you won't have access to their APIs if you just flip this one.
Better to enable
so
system.
That creating a new application with the system user flow would be recommended, and then you could port them slowly over.
So best to enable system user token from the very get-go before you authenticate any customers after that point.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, there is that. So then if I go underneath authentication, I can also see that my callback URL is already here for my allowed redirects. So let's go ahead and take this information, and I guess we can at this point use DevNet-Tools, a custom application. I'm going to use my DevNet-Tools in order to get my system user token, because that's not available to me here in the UI today, at least today. Perhaps in the future, but not right now. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my other browser and go to DevNet-Tools or DevNet-Tools.SuperOffice.com, HTTPS. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the big green sign in button at the top. Going full screen here. And I'll go ahead and click on sign in. And I need I know it's for my environment. It's going to work for all environments, but I'm only enabled for SOD at this point. So I also need a client ID and a client secret. So let me go ahead and grab my client ID from my text file, paste that in. Then I'll go ahead and take my client secret. I'll go ahead and paste that in, and I'll sign in. Now, here I'm given the opportunity to select a tenant because I have multiple tenants for my Super ID user. So I'll choose the 26759 tenant. Let's go ahead. Now I get the consent dialog. Do I want to allow robot service by Stark Industries to access my tenant web services? I'll go ahead and I'll approve that. Now behind the scenes, there's creating that authorization record inside the Operations Center. And from that, it gives me a system user token magic string, which is the name of my application with a dash and then some random characters. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this system user token string, and I'm going to go ahead and put that into my text file. This is my mock-up of a database, for example. We want to store this in a database to be used later. The tenant that's associated with this system user token is the 26759 tenant, so I'll go ahead and store that as well. So now I have all of the information I need in order to sign this system user token to get back a system user credential. Let's go ahead and do that. I can use the DevNet application where we are now in order to sign my system user token to get back a JWT that contains a system user ticket. This application, though, the DevNet-Tools, is a Node.js application. And when I'm using Node, I need to be able to use a PEM certificate to request a JWT. So I can go ahead and use this nice little conversion utility here called convert RSA XML to PEM and convert that to a PEM format. So I'll just copy my private key. I'll paste that in there. I'll click on convert. So here's my PEM format of that RSA key. I can copy that, or I can just go ahead and click forward PEM and it will bring me to this token to ticket page. I'll paste in that key there. You can see that the application remembers my system user token that was given to me on the previous page, on my profile page. So what I'm going to do right now is use this certificate to sign this system user token, and it uses a very special format in order to do that. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. The way that you sign a system user token is defined on docs, on our docs.superoffice.com site. If I go to docs.superoffice.com, I have this big button up here on in the hero of the website, or I could go ahead and click on developer. But if I click on SuperOffice APIs, I come to this landing page that has more buttons on the top. I'll go ahead and click on Authentication Overview button, and that brings me into the table of contents for all of the API related information, how to use the SuperOffice APIs. I'm going to go ahead, since we're in the online authentication realm, I'll expand online authentication. We're using system user, so I'll go ahead and expand on system user backchannel node, and then there's the option to sign system user token. So I click on there, and this is how we have to sign a system user token. First, we take the system user token as a plain string, then we put a period after it, then we go ahead and put the UTC date formatted as shown here. We put a period after that, and then we base 64 those three things. So if we take a look at it, here's kind of what the format is. The system user token with a period, then the formatted date with another period, and then the base 64 encoded representation of those three things. Now we want to go ahead and sign that magic string. And we have some examples down here on how you would do that with C#. We also have some examples of how you would do that with JavaScript, as well as an example of how to do that with PHP. Now, the DevNet-Tools website has the capability, it uses the JavaScript version to sign that system user token. So when I click on next, it's going to perform that sign-in operation. So now we get back the signed representation of that system user token. Here I'll call it the sign token. We've got the context identifier and the client secret again. So how would we call the web services or exchange that signed token for a JWT which contains the system user ticket? Well, let me show you how to do that using the REST web services. So I use the REST client in Visual Studio Code because it's really verbose here in verbatim, so you can see us doing that. We've got our tenant identifier here already predefined. This is the one that we use to create the authorization record for. We've got the signed token. I'm going to go ahead, I had that on the clipboard, so I'll just paste it into here. Now we need the client secret, which is the application token. We'll go ahead and put that in there. We are working against the development environment, so that's SuperOffice Development Environment, or SOD for short. Now I'm going to send this request, which takes the signed token in the body. It's a post request to the partner system user endpoint. And there's an authenticate method there, or authenticate endpoint. It takes the signed system token. We expect to get back a return token of type JWT. We have to specify the client secret in the application token property. Then we specify the client identifier, which is the same thing as a customer ID or a context identifier here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on send request. That's going to send off that request to the partner system user / authenticate endpoint. And here you can see on the right hand side we get back a JWT token. So it was successful. There's no error message. I've copied the token to my clipboard. So I'm going to go back to my browser, open up jwt.ms. There are multiple websites that you can use for this just to inspect the claims that are inside this JWT. So I'll paste it. So I've pasted the JWT here. You can see the different representations. You've got the metadata about the sign-in signature of the certificate. The blue text represents the claims in this JWT, and then the green part represents the signed portion of this JWT that was signed by SuperOffice. So looking at the claims here, I can see lots of different claims. I know that the identity provider used to issue this was SuperID. The name of my application was Robot Service. Is it an administrator? Well, system user basically has administrator rights, has access to everything. I see my context identifier, or my customer ID, and then the name of my company. And then most importantly, this is we finally got back to the heart of it. We get back to this ticket claim. And then here is our ticket. We know that we have a valid SuperOffice system user ticket because it starts off with 7T and then colon and then this magic string that follows. So let's go ahead and just use this system user ticket. I'm going to copy that to the clipboard, go back to my Visual Studio Code application because I've got some REST calls that we want to make. So let's use that system user ticket credential to make a call to get a contact, for example, in my database. I've got some code here. Let's just get rid of this. We don't need that anymore. Now I need a token. Actually, this would be for an access token, but we're not going to make access token requests. We're actually going to make a system or a ticket request. So I'm going to populate the ticket with the ticket value that we got back from SuperOffice. You can see that 7T there. We've got the tenant identifier, it's the 26759. And now the only thing I need is a client secret. So let's go ahead and populate the client secret based on the client secret we had in the DevNet-Tools application. It's also the same one that we had here from in our database, right? Application token. So I'll come back to the Visual Studio Code, my REST client. I've got my context identifier, the environment, the system user ticket, and the client secret. I'm going to make a call. Here's where I'm populating the headers, and instead of a bearer token, I'm using the SO token type, and I'm passing in the ticket variable. I'm also have to specify my SO-app token header using the client secret or the client application token value. And I'm going to go ahead and say, give me the contact where the contact ID equals 17, or in other words, the SuperOffice company where ID equals 17. So I'll send off this request. I'll click send request. It sent the request off, and here I get back the contact information all in this JSON structure. Got the contact ID where 17. The name of the company is Star Labs Incorporated, and department, research laboratory, etc. So then we get back the company that we've asked for using the REST request. So in the developer portal, we've created an application for server-to-server communications. We use the DevNet-Tools website in order to get back the system user token. We've used that also. We've also used the DevNet-Tools website to sign the system user token with our certificate, the private key of our certificate. We've used that signed token to send it off to the SuperOffice Partner System User endpoint to obtain a JWT, which contains a lot of claims, including the system user ticket claim or credential. And now we've used that ticket credential to go off and call our web services and get data back from our tenant. Margareta, how are we doing?
I think you're doing great.
So, okay, so let's go ahead and allow me to just try and summarize the difference between a standard application and a custom application, what goes on behind the scenes. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for a tenant application, it's very similar to what we just did. We use the DevNet-Tools website as my application, as a partner application. I put in the client ID, client secret, used Super ID to log in. I was presented with a consent dialog where I had to approve this application to allow that application to access my tenant web services. I approved it. Behind the scenes, that created an authorization record inside the Operations Center, which created the contract between that tenant admin user and that application. It generated and stored a system user token, this magic string, and sent that back to me in the JWT containing in the JWT as a claim. So then I extracted that system user token claim, which I actually scraped from the DevNet-Tools website, the profile page, saved that in my Notepad database for using that later. Then we went ahead and used the DevNet-Tools website to sign that system user token string, used that signed representation, and then went into Visual Studio Code into a REST application and sent that off to the PartnerSystemUserService endpoint to obtain another JWT which contained the system user ticket, which then we used to actually obtain a customer or a contact using the REST API. So the difference when using a custom application really comes into play when we publish or want to publish that application to be used in the production environment. Everything that we've just shown you for a standard application routine is identical for a custom application when a consultant or a developer, a tenant developer, wants to go ahead and just work in the SOD environment, in the development environment. He can do it exactly like we just did it. There's no difference. But when that custom application is going to be published to the production environment, we can't just allow anybody in that tenant or any administrator in that tenant to create that authorization record inside Operations Center. So we actually manually create that authorization record. So at that point, when you click on the Request to Publish button inside the developer portal, when I click Request to Publish, that sends off a request to SuperOffice to say, okay, this application is ready for production. So it goes into our support system. More likely than not, it's Margareta that gets this request, and then she'll go ahead and validate all of the settings for this custom application, assuming everything is correct. And then she's going to go ahead and accept this request to publish and allow it to go to production. She'll go ahead and promote it to production, but behind the scenes, there's this one little setting that you don't rarely ever pay that much attention to. It's down here underneath the verification setting, underneath advanced. So I click on advanced to enable everything. There's this verification record, and there's an authorization level. And because we don't want anybody and everybody that's an administrator in that tenant to be able to authorize this application, which would create multiple authorization records in the operation center, we don't want that. So Margareta behind the scenes will set this to explicit. And then that comes back to the diagram here where she explicitly creates this authorization record, which is a contract between that tenant and that application. She'll send off an email notification that this application has been authorized to go into production to both the tenant administrator and the tenant developer for that application. And then the tenant administrator will have all of the information he needs to obtain the system user token using DevNet-Tools, for example. And then the flow that once you have the system user token, the flow that I've already demonstrated to sign it, to get back the signed version, to exchange that for a system user ticket, and then use that ticket in the web service calls towards that tenant is identical. It's the same. It's just that there's this little bit of a manual process when it goes into production. Margareta, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, it's the authorization record is so we specify that this app may only be used by this customer. So that's for standard apps, every administrator can say that I want this app. As soon as it's authorized, it's good to go. So that's the main difference between customer standard. Standard can be authorized by any administrator, while the custom application, we explicitly set the authorization record in OAuth before the application have access to the web services.
Mm-hmm. So what else should we know about a system user?
Play nice with it. You have access to completely destroy the database. You know, when you use the REST API or the other APIs, we protect the database owner. We don't with the system user. And the system user is also used by us, for example, whenever we need to update information. So it's pretty much like SA on the SQL server. Oh, there's one more thing. You know, the certificates versus our certificates. You have the RSA key, and then you have the federated login. When will you use the federated login certificates?
So we've got the SuperOffice certificates, and there's a couple different variations. You've got the physical certificates that are used to validate the tokens that are sent to you from SuperOffice that have been signed. Now, when you're dealing with REST web services, you generally don't necessarily have to use the physical certificates for doing validation. What is normally used is you would use the ones that are hosted using the OpenID Connect metadata endpoints. So let me go ahead and show you what that looks like. So if we go to sod.superoffice.com, log in /log out, and then we've got the well-known endpoints. Let me go ahead and just sort of zoom in here so you see this. We've got the environment and superoffice.com/login.wellknown/OpenID-configuration. Now this gives you back a JSON structure, which we use for the OpenID Connect authentication or authorization process. With that comes a JOCS URI, which if I click on that to follow it, it comes to this well-known or superoffice.superoffice.com/login/.wellknown/JOCS endpoint. And this contains the SuperOffice public certificate, which can then be used to validate privately signed JWTs sent to you from SuperOffice. So the behind the scenes, the DevNet-Tools website uses those public certificates to validate the returned JSON file or the returned JWT from SuperOffice. Alternatively, you can download the certificates that are used in the different SuperOffice environments. There's a download link here. If I click on download and I download these certificates, they would then be installed inside the server's certificate store of where you're actually going to be using those certificates. There is instructions on the docs.superoffice.com website that shows you how to install these certificates into that certificate store using the certificates MMC plugin or snap-in on that server. And then you would use those for database mirror invalidation. You would use them for quote connector validation, ERP sync connector validations, and also you can use them for validating the JWT sent to you from the PartnerSystemUserService endpoint. There is a way, if you want to avoid installing these in the certificate store, to override the validation routines. It's called override the certificate resolver. This is if you use our libraries to validate certificates. You can store them, one of the certificates, generally called SuperOffice Federated Login, it's called the same name for each one of the environments. So you just have to make sure you have the right environment certificate for when performing a validation for the environment you're in. Have that certificate available. Specify that as your JWT issue sign-in certificate. And then using the token handler, you can validate that token using the physical certificate. There are several other ways to exchange a system user token for a system user ticket. There is our libraries on nuget, which we have called SuperOffice.SystemUser.Client. This makes it extremely easy for you to exchange your system user token for a system user ticket. Basically, you instantiate the system user client class. You get an instance of it. You pass in the information that you need to sign the system user token. We talked about that at using the DevNet-Tools application. You need the environment you're working in or the subdomain. You need the customer ID or the context identifier. You need the client secret. And of course, you need the private key. And of course, the system user token. That's what gets put into this system user info instance when you new up your system user client instance. From that, you can call get system user JWT async, or just directly call get system user ticket async. And then both of these, behind the scenes, it will validate that token for you, returned from SuperOffice, so you don't have to worry about any of that. You won't have to worry about installing certificates on your server or any of the complexities involved with that. I think we've gotten quite good at that in the past couple of years. Yeah, it used to be quite the bear in order to validate your tokens from SuperOffice, but no more. Especially for the system user client, it's much, much easier now. So there's that capability. Now that library is actually used by another library that we have that makes it easier to access our REST web services called the SuperOffice.WebApi library. And using the SuperOffice.WebApi library, you get access to an agent carrier type of flow or framework in order to call our web services. And you get to manually set the authorizations or the header files that will be used to set the header files on each request. using authorizations, and we have several different authorization libraries. We have one for the system user ticket flow. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. I have downloaded a sample application that we have on our GitHub repository underneath github.com/SuperOffice. I've pinned that sample at the top of the website, so we see github.com/SuperOffice, and the sample is called SuperOffice.WebApi samples. If we click into that, there's a little bit more information about what it contains, and it does use the system user functionality behind the scenes. It's got a couple libraries and a helper library up here called DevNet Online. I just happen to have that open here in Visual Studio, and I'm going to go ahead and look. We're looking at the solution, and I'm going to play with the SuperOffice.WebApi.net core sample. And inside there, we're looking at the program CS file. And in the beginning, in the program, when the program starts up, it's going to instantiate the constructor of it. Let's see down here in main. The configuration, this application context, is just some helper code in order to contextualize our application. You don't have to use this, but it's there if you want to use it in the sample. When the program starts up, when I create the new instance, it will call this constructor, which will call off this static method getAppContext, which will populate that application context up above. I'm going to pass in the context identifier for the application that I am, or for the customer that I'm working with. I'm, in this case, using customer 26759 again. I need a system user token. So let's go back to our Notepad database, grab our system user token, copy that. I'll put that here into the argument for system user token. And I'm not going to worry about access token here because we're not actually using an access token. Down below then, when the program says or starts up here, getAppContext, getAppContext is actually going to call getApplication, which is where I'm going to put in my client ID and my client secret. So let's go back to our database again. I get my app ID. I need my client secret, which is my app token. Here, ID doesn't matter. This is just, again, a helper. The name of my application here in this case is not terribly important. It's not going to fail if it's not correct, but let's just go ahead and set it anyways. Then I need my private key, so I'll go ahead and I'll copy in my RSA XML private key. I'll paste that in there. It already has the DevNet-Tools redirect URI defined, but again, for this instance, that is not necessarily necessary. So here, let's just walk through this one more time. So when the program instance is created, it calls off this constructor, which says getAppContext, which up here is going to set this application context. When I say getAppContext, it's going to instantiate a new application context, and here's where it calls getApplication. So this is basically all of those properties that we just set: the client ID, the client secret, and the private key. It's also going to set up a application user, which in this case is just going to set the access token, but again, we're not actually using this, so it doesn't really matter. It's specifying that we're going to instantiate a tenant, and that tenant is going to be the customer 26759, which is defined up above, or it comes in here into as an argument. Here's a parameter to this getAppContext method. I'm going to specify the environment is for the development environment, and I'm just going to go ahead and set that system user token into the app authorization instance, and it has a property called system user token. So we're going to go ahead and just set that system user token there. So up here, when the program kicks off, instantiates the program, It's going to say get tenant status based on the tenant, which it looks at the identifier. This is best practices. We always say if you're going to be calling our REST web services, make sure that the tenant is available so that you don't send off requests to a tenant that might be in maintenance mode or currently doing a backup. And then I'll get back the status of that tenant, and as long as it's running, then I'll go ahead and call get system user info, which again, if we look at that, it's instantiating an instance of the system user info data type using our environment, the context identifier, the client secret, the private key, and the system user token, all coming from the application context that we instantiated at the beginning of this set. So, and then I'm going to say get system user ticket, which is going to use it and passing in that system user info. But as you can imagine, it's using that system user client behind the scenes. So here's the system user client. I'm getting an instance of that. And then I'm going to say get system user ticket async, and I'll get back a ticket from that endpoint. So at this point, we should have everything that we need, ticket credential, to call off that method that finally used the ticket agent to get back a contact ID. The contact ID that we want to get at this point, let's see, what did we say? We said 12. Let's go ahead and be consistent. We'll say 17. Let's try and get 17. All right, I think we're ready to run this. Margareta, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Let's go ahead and start this application up. Let's at least get to the check tenant status breakpoint and see what happens. Build succeeded. The application is running. All right, we get to the endpoint. Let's check our tenant, make sure that we're looking at the right tenant. 26759. That's good. Here's the tenant's APIs. So if I'll check the tenant status, I'll just step over that. Check out the tenant status. Everything seems to be good here. It's all running. Properties of tenant status. We see the context identifier. We see that the state is running. So let's go ahead and get the system user info. So that basically gets the properties that define our net server services version on that tenant. And then now I'm going to go ahead and step into the get contact entity method, which is where we go ahead and get the system user stuff. So we're going to check the tenant status again, make sure it's running. We're going to get the system user info, which contains all of the information we previously set. We're going to go ahead and say get system user ticket. I'll go ahead and step into that. We're going to instantiate the system user client. We're going to say get system user ticket. Wait for the result to come back. We'll take a look at that. We see, in fact, we do have a system user ticket. We've validated it, extracted it from the JWT. Here we're going to go ahead and just loop over it and print that out to the console. So I'll just say run the cursor here. Went to diagnostics debug, so that's down here in the debug window, so we can go ahead and check it out. So there's all the claims from that JWT, including our system user ticket. So that will go ahead and return to the calling method. Now we can go ahead, set the authorization record. This is where we're going to create the system user ticket authorization type in our web API options. Again, there's more information about using this library on the NuGet page and also links to the samples. So we're going to go ahead and set that up. We'll instantiate the contact agent with that configuration, which uses that authorization to set the headers appropriately. We'll call off and say get contact entity with that contact entity equal to 12. And then finally we'll write out that company name. And in fact, it's getting back the company, Star Labs. Let's see, let's look at the contact entity. And look at the name. It is in fact Star Labs. So there we go. We're getting back Star Labs as expected. Awesome. And I think that's about it. All we wanted to demonstrate is using the system user token, using the SuperOffice.WebApi libraries, then also uses behind the scenes the SuperOffice.WebApi.authorizations library, and also the authorizations.SystemUser library, which ultimately uses the SuperOffice.SystemUser.Client package in order to exchange that system user token for a system user ticket. Anything else, Margareta, that I haven't yet covered?
I think we are good now. Hopefully I haven't lost too many. Cleared up some confusion.
All right, so if you have any questions, go ahead and post them down in the comments below. I'd like to hear back from you. You can, of course, reach us through the community website, community.superoffice.com. Use the forums there. Or if you go to Docs and you have an issue with the certificates, let me go ahead and show you that real quickly. If you're on the Docs website and you have problems with setting up your certificates or anything like that, you could go ahead and, let me just switch over here to full screen. If you click on the feedback button, you can go ahead and click on feedback, and you can give us feedback for any of the articles that you might have issues with there, including system user token or certificates or certificate resolvers. Just make sure to ask from the page that is giving you problems. So I think that's everything. Thank you so very much, Margareta, for helping me out here, walking through creating a system user application, talking about system user as a whole and the whole workflow for as a standard application and or what's different with a custom application, and talking a little bit about certificates and all of the different packages and flows that you have available to you. You know, calling the web services directly, whether it's REST or it's SOAP or if it's using the NuGet packages. There's lots of different variations to work with background processing for SuperOffice. So with that, I hope this helped. And thank you for watching. See you next time.